Harbor delivery gone wrong. One chance to turn a setup into a way out. The river air burned cold as steel while the city waited for a man to choose between fear and a clean break. Jalen Marks kept late hours at South Pier Auto Works because quiet after closing left room to think. And the shop smelled like something he could trust. The floor held a fine skin of old coolant and gray dust. And the racks leaned, and a fan with a cracked cage hummed a thin note. He wiped his hands with a rag that was once white, and looked out at the rail line that ran behind the block. Freight moved there in the dark, slow and heavy, and every passing wheel shook a jar of bolts on his bench. He had rent due in 4 days, a sister who needed a school uniform, and a letter about unpaid power from a landlord who liked to tape warnings at eye level. None of it scared him like the note that had arrived folded under the shop door. It carried no name, only a time and a corner 2 blocks from Harborbridge. Rules were simple in that part of the city. Do your work, keep your head down, stay away from the men who wear clean shoes on muddy sidewalks. Jalen had stayed away for years. He had learned the color of trouble, and the way voices slide quiet when you step into a room that hosts a plan. But bills have their own gravity. He told himself it was one delivery then out. A sealed envelope for a man called Rig, who ran collections for a crew that did not tolerate delay. The boss above Rig was rumored to keep a desk in a windowless room in a river casino that never closed. The envelope felt heavier than paper should, like a stone that wanted to sink him. The city around him took on a hard shine that night. Streetlights pooled in shallow bowls on wet asphalt. Sirens braided with the wind that came off the water. A stray dog nosed a bag near the gate and went on with a limp. Jalen checked the clock, locked the bay, and tucked the envelope inside his jacket. He moved through blocks that changed in small ways from hour to hour. Sandwich shops gone dark, a corner bodega still lit, a bus rolling past with 6 riders staring down at phones. He passed the mural of a ship with blue paint flaking at the edges, and thought about how paint fails the same way promises do, first at the corners. At the meeting spot, a man leaned on a silver sedan, and watched with a stare that felt like a hand checking pockets. The man took the envelope without a word, then nodded at the bridge shadow and said the next piece was already on the way. Jalen knew there was no such thing as one piece in a world built on favors. He slid his hands into his jacket, felt the slick paper of a second note that had been inserted at some point between the gate and the sidewalk, and understood he was now inside a game he had not agreed to play. Back at the shop later, he opened the note on the bench, and found a photo of the front door of his building, and a simple line telling him to show up at dawn with a borrowed van. That line was written with a calm hand. He stood in the hum of the lights and tasted the dry air, and told himself this was the last night the city would move him like a pawn. He moved on. Dawn came thin and silver over the river, and the van he borrowed from a neighbor rattled like a drawer of cutlery. He drove across Harborbridge, past meters covered in layers of stickers, past a lot where weeds grew around a stack of wire spools, toward a warehouse with faded letters that once said seafood. Rig waited near a loading dock with 2 men who did not blink much. The job was to carry 3 sealed boxes from the dock to the van, drive to a storage unit outside the loop, and return with a signed note. If he did it clean, they would forget the envelope, the bridge, the fact that he ever existed. Jalen kept his face still and lifted each box with careful hands. The cardboard felt dense. Something settled inside when he took a step. He placed the boxes in the van and tied them with a strap. Rig watched, then scratched his chin and said a new plan had arrived and that he would ride along. They pulled away from the dock, and the city slid by in narrow slices. Jalen counted traffic lights and counted turns like a child reciting a rhyme. A police unit rolled by in the other lane, and did not slow down. Blocks later, Rig told him to take a side street that ran under the old viaduct. Sun sat low and sharp, and the road under the arches turned into patches of glare and shadow like a broken checkerboard. Jalen kept the wheel steady. A memory rose of his father changing brake pads in a dirt driveway one summer. The smell of metal and hot resin. The way care turns a danger into a task. He took that memory and held it like a tool. At the second arch, he saw a sedan tucked into the dark with a hood that had not cooled yet. Rig told him to stop and open the rear doors. A shape moved near the fence. A phone lifted, a lens watched. Jalen felt the hook then. Whatever sat in the boxes was built to put his name on a charge. He looked at the bolts that held the hinge, looked at the strap buckle, and saw a path. His voice came out level as he asked for a quick check so the load would not shift. He pulled a small mirror from a side pocket and angled it inside the van, showing the strap number that was already printed on the receipt from the dock, and spoke about liability. Men who move goods live by numbers on paper. Rig grunted and waved him on. A camera blinked in the sedan. A siren sounded a block away and then faded. Jalen pushed the van forward and felt the plan twist under his hands the way a stuck bolt gives when the thread finally catches the truth. He eased toward the mouth of the side street and paused at a small fuel stop. He lifted the hood and let a clean splash on the radiator cap make a thin ghost of steam. Rig frowned and checked his phone while a gray coupe idled near the air pump. Jalen bought water, wiped the windshield, and folded the receipt with the strap number. He rolled out at a steady pace so no patrol would have a reason to look twice. Warehouses slid by in long rows, paint faded to a calm gray, rails humming in the distance now. The storage unit sat in a strip of rented doors behind a self-wash car lot where sun painted wet concrete. The clerk kept a small radio on low and a stack of forms near her elbow. Jalen parked and saw a city inspector tag on the door frame that had a date from last month. Details matter when men think no one looks. He asked for the unit number. The clerk checked the system and frowned at an unpaid note. He paid cash for 1 month and took the lock key. Inside the unit the light was soft and square, dust in the air like flour. He set down the boxes and looked for a vent, found one, and found a second camera hidden behind the grate. The lens was new and fed a cable that ran behind a strip of wallboard. He felt his jaw tighten. They wanted a record of him with the boxes. He backed out, closed the door, and called a friend from the shop who studied electronics at night. The friend arrived on a bike and carried a small tool roll. In 10 minutes the cable lay on the floor. Jalen cut a neat length and coiled it in a bag with a label from the unit. Evidence is a shape you can hold. He dialed a community officer he knew from a clinic where he took his sister for shots. A patient woman who told him to call before a problem turned into a record. She came in an unmarked compact and listened in the shade while he laid out each step, from the note at the door to the dock to the sedan under the viaduct. She looked at the cable and the receipt and the strap number and nodded once. She asked him to wait in the office while she made a call. 2 cars rolled in quiet. A supervisor with a tie walked around the van and opened a box. Inside sat phone parts and 4 zip bags of powder that looked like window cleaner. Field test liquid turned blue. The supervisor did not smile. The clerk did. The officer asked for his keys and took the boxes as property. She told him to go home and stay reachable, then sent a unit to talk with the men at the dock. By evening the river air felt softer. Rig and his pair sat in a holding room somewhere without windows, and his building door had no note for once. Jalen cooked rice with sliced peppers and boiled eggs and set a plate for his sister, who told a long story about a science fair while a train crossed the bridge and shook the glasses in the cabinet. He listened and felt the city change weight, as if the block had decided to share part of the load. He washed dishes and looked at the grease on his hands and thought about work that pays clean. He would take more night shifts, but the work would be his and not a hook. He slept early and deep, and dawn brought a clear line across the floor that looked like a road moving toward open ground. The next week he met the officer, gave copies of receipts, and she said the case would move. He walked by the river and watched waves tap piers and thought about steady work and safe nights. The city would not hand him a prize. It would answer proof and care. He could live with that and build on that.